I've churned through a lot of delays in recent years, but I'm very confident the Space Echo is a keeper. It looks good, it's made of metal, it's true stereo in and out. There's USB for the firmware, there's MIDI in and out, there is socket for expression pedal and foot switches, and everything you need to actually control the delay is laid out in front of you. There's plenty of knob twiddling. And happily that means there's no menu diving, there's no screen, there's no fiddly writing to try to figure out, there's no secondary functions or mystery knobs. And in that respect, it reminds me most of the Erica Synths Zen Delay. This has got bass and treble, this one's got a filter, although this filter affects the entire output, which so aggravated me I sold my first one before I was overcome with grief and bought another one. The Space Echo though just affects, or the bass and treble just affects the delayed signal, which in my book is far superior. This has got drive, this has got saturation. The feedback controls on this are very good. On this one it goes from 1 or 2, 3, 4, 50, 100 million and off to infinity, which some people might find useful, I suppose. What this one's got, which is superior to the Space Echo, is in the delay modes you've actually got ping pong. The Space Echo's got no ping pong, in fact it's got no stereo field to speak of at all. Mode 12, which activates all 4 heads, does ping pong a bit, but this will help. It's like a scatter. So in terms of stereo field and ping-ponging, that's sort of pretty useless anyway. But that is a minor quibble. The only other quibble, if I have to have a quibble, with the Space Echo is, well, something that eagle-eyed people might already have noticed that is modified, and that is the original Space Echo came with these horrible Moog-style knobs, which obviously I have ripped off and replaced with a little selection of whatever I had available. And I did that because they're so shiny and the little black mark was so small that depending on the lighting, the angle of the lighting, I couldn't even tell what setting the knobs were on. So this configuration for me is far superior. But in terms of quibbles, that is a tiny one, and if you can fix it yourself, all the better. So let's have a quick tour of the machine. Up here we've got memories and presets, so you click through the little memory button here and you go through various saved functions, or in the manual mode it's a WYSIWYG mode, in that whatever the knobs are on, that's what you're going to get, and that's manual, so that's what I'm on 99% of the time because it's fun to twiddle the knobs and it's so fast and everything's in front of you. Well, why not? Input is just line or guitar, so obviously in this case it's on line. Here we've got the tape age, so you've got new or aged, so it's on new at the moment. Aged. So you can hear there the aged version of course rolls off a lot of the highs. It's probably doing all sorts of little nuanced jiggery pokeries as well, but notice it. Well, actually it might help if I turn the wound flutter off. Well, I could sit there forever, but other than rolling off the highs, it doesn't mean much to me. The wound flutter knob, up to about 50%, you can start to really hear it adding in all those little weirdnesses. Starting to get a little bit wobbly. Up at the top there. It's that sort of seasick vibrato, which still sounds not too bad in some ways, but 50% is often where I have it, and this gives a little bit of variation without being obvious. Saturation. It's very nice. That's a beautiful sound, and sometimes saturations and distortions don't work all that well with the DB01 for some reason, like the timeline saturation just almost has no effect at all on the DB01, but this one is quite beautiful. It's much like the DB01 itself in some ways. Get lost in this stuff for hours. And that's why this machine is so beautiful. It's so tweakable. You know, the bass and treble, well, actually you can see here I've got them turned up all the way. There's a little indent at 12 o'clock. So this is really the normal. Spot where it is. But I tend to have them turned up because the echo amount, which is also in this case at 100%, doesn't actually give you all that much. So by turning this up, you get a bit of a boost. And then, of course, you can change the flavor. This back on strum. So that's very nice. We'll leave it all the way up for now. We'll turn some of the bass off. Now the reverb, and in fact I've had the reverb on this whole time, which goes to show it's quite subtle and certainly very, well, it's very enjoyable, it's very smooth, it's not obtrusive. Obtrusive in any way, and you can easily have it on the whole time and hardly even know that you've got it on. This one is on plate. There's 5 types: spring, hall, plate, room, and ambience, but none of them go to extremes. So you're not going to write a bloopy ambient masterpiece on these reverbs. And really that's one of the hallmarks of this machine. I think in true Roland tradition it keeps you in a pretty defined little space. It's a very sweet, lovely little space, but it's not going to let you go anywhere too weird or do anything too extreme like the bass and treble. They're very nicely calibrated, but they're certainly not extreme. Likewise, the reverb, which is has no parameters. It's just an amount. They've decided what sounds good, and that's what you get. And if you don't like it, you can go elsewhere. But it is a beautiful reverb. It does the job very nicely. The repeat rate, now this one's got the clock coming in, so the repeat rate in this instance is irrelevant, but you can obviously see the rate it's going at. This is the intensity, which after 12 o'clock will start to feed back. And will get more or less vicious depending on what mode you're in. It doesn't actually go crazy, like it's not going to melt a hole through your floor and sink to the other side of the world, but it does get pretty vicious. And here we have just echo and out. So, reverb. There's a couple of other functions that you get by holding down either the tap or the on-off switch, but they're entirely, can I say, useless. This one's called twist, so and that's all it does. And even worse, it's so much louder than the actual delay effect. Times when you can use it, I think, would be very limited, and using it more than once you'd go, that again. Over here we've got warp. Which is really the same thrill as twiddling the intensity knob, except not as good because it doesn't seem to stay in time. So if you want that, get much better control using the intensity knob. So my way of thinking, those two are entirely useless, but that's okay, easily forgotten about. So all the main controls all sitting on the front panel, which brings us to the mode selector. And one of the things that strangely initially I thought was a bit of a weakness of the machine, which was there's these modes and there's certain head configurations, and that'll give you a certain pattern of delays, and well, that sort of fences you in a bit, doesn't it? But really any delay is a pattern delay, from the simplest little unit, which will just go donk donk donk, up to something a bit more complex, which might have eighths and sixteenths and triplets and dotted eighths. So there you've got 3, 4, 5 modes. And this one, I think the way to think about it is, well, instead of those 4 or 5 modes, it's got 12 modes. And it's a pattern delay, like every delay is a pattern delay. So in that respect, you might even say this is nothing special, but it certainly gives you a lot of very interesting capabilities, which are even more obvious when you give it a bit of rhythmic material to chew on, which we will do later. Now, when I say that all the functions here are on the machine, on the knobs, there are some functions which require you to power cycle while holding a button and selecting things. Happily though, they're all configuration options. One of the ones I did try, in order to, I'd hoped, get a little bit more wet signal, was to turn the preamp on, but strangely, by turning the preamp on, the only thing that happened is it would cut the incoming signal strength as soon as you switched it on. So that's very forgettable. Maybe it works a lot better for guitars, but it didn't work very well on line level, that's for sure. One of the settings that you might want to enable is the MIDI clock. Now I've got MIDI clock coming in on a little 3.5mm adapter there, not included, and it works very nicely, but you've got to enable that in the configuration. So let's just say we wanted to configure the MIDI clock. I've got to turn it off, turn the selector in this case to 12, so different numbers in the mode selector will get you into different options when you switch it back on again. Now in this case we've got to hold the on-off button, plug it back in. So now you can see it's in a slightly different mode. This is typically where you change the options. Press the memory button. Manual tends to be the default position, so that's where it'll be when you get the unit or when you do a factory reset. And then by pressing the memory button, it will cycle through whatever options you've got. In this case, you've only got one option, which is enable MIDI clock. So that is no MIDI clock, and this one is MIDI clock enabled. Press this again. Now we're back into normal operation, and we've got the MIDI clock operating. Now likewise, let's change the reverb setting. Actually, let's just hear this one before we go. So that's plate. So take that out. I hate having to power cycle these things so many times, but there it is. Got to be in mode 12. Hold down the tap button, I think. Yes. Power it back on. And see here it's on number 2, which is plate, whereas the default one it comes with is in manual mode, which is spring. So let's have the spring reverb. Well, I won't go through the agonies of showing you the power cycle every time with the reverbs, but through the magic of editing, I'll compare the reverbs. So this one is spring. This is hall. This is room. And ambience. And then here we are back on plate again. So let's have a quick run through of the actual modes. Here we are on mode number 1. Pretty familiar with by now. Mode 12, which is, as I say, a bit of an odd one. Definitely hear some panning going on there. And it's a shame. They couldn't have included in one of these other modes something that was actually ping pong, but there's hope for that in some firmware update. So that's the end of the talking. Now, just a bit of a noodle.